Welcome to Hangxiety with Lisa T. I'm so glad you are joining me on my morning anti-anxiety routine as I dissect whatever issues or news stories from around the world and in space happen to be inhabiting my brain on that particular day. I'm Lisa Timmons, or Timmons Lisa, depending on how you know me, and I like to listen to soothing elevator music while processing some of the most absurd, terrifying, celebrity-obsessed, full-blown late-stage capitalism, climate change, disaster-based news you can possibly imagine, while also narrating over it in a gently informative, classic radio-style DJ voice because, hey, sometimes you just need to hear it that way. Welcome to Hangxiety with Lisa T. I am your host, Lisa T, and once again, guys, I'm obsessed with Palestine and the situation going on there. So I am going to keep talking about this subject, basically picking up where I left off in my last episode. Since Israel's escalation of the Hamas attack by retaliating with massive airstrikes on Gaza, including, it appears, several hospitals and possibly churches, many people in countries around the world have been struggling to find reliable, unbiased, real-time sources of information in traditional media as it relates to the people on the ground in Gaza. For many, a look at Israel's historically terrible human rights report card in relation to the Palestinian people feels very much like the ghost of a smoking gun of Christmas future. And the U.S. co-signing this move makes it extra suspicious, given our comfort level with committing war crimes in plain sight. It seems all too easy a parallel to draw to what happened in the United States shortly after 9/11, when we all witnessed George W. Bush use imaginary weapons of mass destruction to justify the invasion of Iraq, and therefore the killing of numerous innocent people in the process before our very eyes. And this brings me to the title of this episode, which is Fool Us Once, Shame on Us. Fool us twice, actually we won't let you this time. So, what I'd like to do this episode is provide some tentpole historical context of war propaganda used during both world wars, an overview of the origin of the military-industrial complex's relationship with Hollywood, and how this all relates to the War of Misinformation in which we currently find ourselves here in America. And around the world, really. In addition, I will also add, as I always do, my personal insight into the U.S. military propaganda machine, which I experienced as a child, growing up on a U.S. Army base stationed overseas. But most importantly, I'd like to share exactly what the Palestinian people are asking for, as expressed in a statement that was released by them and is currently being shared on social media to give a voice to the very people at the center of this entire discussion. World War II, the first modern war of propaganda. A huge component of winning a war involves getting the people on your side. I once had a discussion, he might remember it as a disagreement, with my brother-in-law, a full-time soldier. I believe it was a discussion of global politics and strategies of war. I chimed in, of course, you know, the biggest weapon of war is propaganda. A highly educated and arguably incredibly competent soldier, my brother-in-law balked at my statement. I retreated, feeling that I was right, but ultimately realized this battle was one that I didn't need to decisively win at the moment. So the United States' involvement in World Wars I and II had a significant impact on its emergence as a global superpower. Hollywood played a notable role in shaping public opinion and garnering support for U.S. involvement in these conflicts. World War I, 1917 through 1918. At the outbreak of World War I in 1914, the United States initially adopted a policy of neutrality, but several factors eventually led to American involvement starting in 1917 through the end of the war. This initial lack of interest in participating in an international war was a pretty strong sentiment among most Americans. If you think about the time, it wasn't all that long the entire country was at war with itself until the end of the U.S. Civil War in 1865. And also, the American Revolutionary War had only ended in 1783. The country was essentially quite young at the time, and it wasn't always a given for most Americans that the country would become the global political and economic force to which we watched it eventually rise. Hollywood, which was still in its early stages, played a relatively minor role in shaping public opinion during this First World War. Because he didn't have easy access to the sophisticated tools we know today of broadcast television and movies, forget social media, President Woodrow Wilson's administration sought to promote American involvement through propaganda efforts like the Committee on Public Information, which used posters, pamphlets, and films to build support for the war. While Hollywood's role in this war was limited, it laid the groundwork for future collaborations between the U.S. government and the entertainment industry. I would also like to add, just for fun, that a major factor in helping to end World War I was the last major global pandemic, the 1918 flu. One of my all-time favorite books that I'd like to recommend to you, in case you're interested, in a case study of a world war taking place during a global pandemic, which I mean, why wouldn't you be? You're listening to me, right? You should check out Flu, the story of the great influenza pandemic of 1918 and the search for the virus that caused it, by Gina Kolata. It's a super chill read. I mean, if your wild brain functions anything like mine. Anyways, so imagine the United States is witnessing World War II unfold in newsreels, radio programs, and newspaper articles overseas in Europe and spreading everywhere. It's truly not been that long since the population was decimated by the 1918 flu, as well as the First World War. Americans would need some serious motivation to feel strongly enough to allow their government to draft their sons to send them to fight yet another world war. So, Hollywood entered the chat. World War II, 1941 to 1945. The United States entered World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Hollywood played a more prominent role in rallying support for World War II. The U.S. government and the film industry collaborated extensively to create propaganda films that encouraged enlistment, bond sales, and patriotic sentiment. Many famous directors and actors, such as Frank Capra and John Wayne, contributed to these propaganda efforts. Films like Why We Fight and Casablanca were influential in shaping public opinion. You probably are familiar with Casablanca, but it's likely that you're less familiar with the Why We Fight series, unless you're a film historian or war buff. After the draft was reinstated in 1941, with the U.S. entering into the Second World War, compulsory military service did not equal willing and motivated soldiers. Morale among soldiers was low, as they felt they did not understand why they were being forced to leave their families to fight yet again. As a result, the Why We Fight series was commissioned by the U.S. government. I found a great article detailing the history of these films in a strategic military context. In Why We Fight by Dr. Thomas W. Bone, Bone gives a clear explanation of the purpose of the military films. I'll include a link to the full article in the show notes. I will read some excerpts now, and I quote, "The Why We Fight series consisted of 7 separate films produced between 1942 to 1945 by the U.S. Army Signal Corps, under the supervision of Academy Award-winning director Frank Capra. Capra was recruited specifically by Marshall, and early in 1942 was charged with the task of, quote, maintaining morale and instilling loyalty and discipline into the civilian army being assembled to make war on professional enemies, end quote, through a series of films. The film historian Richard McCann has described the Why We Fight series as a combination of a sermon between halves, pep talk, and a barroom bull session. So that was the quote within the quote of this article. If you read the article, you'll see what I'm talking about. Continuing to quote, "While this is an apt description, it is somewhat incomplete. Burdened with the task of making the war understandable and acceptable, the Why We Fight series is also an American history lesson and posits a clear and compelling moral philosophy. The series was designed to both inform and inspire, to show Army troops what they were fighting for and why. Employing the compilation format, visuals of unrelated and unconnected reality were edited into a cohesive and compelling argument, with music and narration providing an emotional undercurrent. Historically, the series was a meeting of the talent of a commercial film industry, a strong tradition of documentary film, and the needs of war. The needs of war indeed. These films depicted the enemy in a clear and often stereotypical manner, helping to create a strong sense of national unity and purpose, and, in some cases, cementing these stereotypes in the budding American exceptionalist psyche. For some people, it may very well have been the first depiction they'd ever seen of someone from that particular country or region of the world. Hollywood's role in both world wars was multifaceted. It not only created propaganda to support the war effort, but also produced films that provided an escape from the harsh realities of wartime. Cheerful distractions? Quite possibly. These movies often portrayed idealized versions of American values, offering a sense of reassurance and hope during challenging times. It also was helping to subtly and not so subtly shape the vision of what a, quote, traditional family unit should resemble with this newfound tool of mass instruction, the Hollywood Entertainment Industrial Complex. Much like the Why We Fight series, films and TV shows that aired during those years when baby boomers were being conceived and born continued to promote this new and improved heteronormative family unit in a mass communication that had previously been unavailable to use on the American public until after World War II. Art did not seem to be imitating life. In fact, it seemed to quite possibly be completely the other way around. In summary, while Hollywood propaganda did play a role in shaping public opinion and generating support for U.S. involvement in World Wars I and II, it was just one component of a broader effort that included government initiatives, speeches by political leaders, and other forms of media. These events helped shape the United States into a global superpower and established a precedent for government and entertainment industry cooperation in times of crisis and convenience. Leni Riefenstahl, Germany's answer to Hollywood. While the Americans were using their Hollywood propaganda machine to drum up sympathy for their cause, Nazi Germany was using a not-so-secret propaganda weapon of its own. Leni Riefenstahl was a renowned German filmmaker and actress, best known for her association with the Nazi regime and her groundbreaking propaganda films. During World War II, Riefenstahl played a significant role in creating propaganda that promoted the Nazi ideology and portrayed Germany in a positive light. Her most famous works during this period were the films Triumph of the Will in 1935 and Olympia in 1938. Triumph of the Will, 1935. Directed and produced by Leni Riefenstahl, Triumph of the Will is perhaps the most infamous example of Nazi propaganda in film history. The film documents the 1934 Nazi Party Congress in Nuremberg, Germany. It was meticulously crafted to glorify Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, portraying them as powerful and unified leaders. Riefenstahl used groundbreaking cinematic techniques, such as sweeping aerial shots and dynamic camera angles, to create a visually stunning and emotionally compelling portrayal of the event. Triumph of the Will aimed to inspire patriotism and devotion to the Nazi regime, and remains a controversial and influential piece of propaganda filmmaking. Olympia, 1938. Olympia is a two-part documentary film directed by Riefenstahl, which covers the 1936 Summer Olympics held in Berlin. While Olympia was less overtly propagandistic compared to Triumph of the Will, it still served as a vehicle to showcase Nazi Germany's technical and organizational achievements. The film's artistic and innovative cinematography earned it international acclaim and furthered the Nazis' efforts to promote their regime to a global audience. Leni Riefenstahl's films were instrumental in creating a positive image of Nazi Germany and its leaders, particularly Adolf Hitler. She used her skills as a filmmaker to portray the Nazi regime in a manner that evoked nationalistic pride, loyalty, and admiration among the German population, and, to some extent, international audiences. After World War II, Riefenstahl faced significant controversy and condemnation for her association with the Nazis and her contributions to their propaganda machine. While she claimed that her work was purely artistic and not political, her legacy remains deeply entwined with the dark history of Nazi propaganda filmmaking. In popular culture, Leni is referenced in Quentin Tarantino's film *Inglourious Basterds*, when undercover British spy masquerading as a German soldier, Lieutenant Archie Hickox, played by Michael Fassbender, Michael Fassbender, pretends that he is from the area of Pitzpalu when questioned about his hometown. Die Weiße Hölle vom Pitzpalu, or The White Hell of Pitzpalu, is the name of a famous German film starring none other than a young Leni Riefenstahl, as a plucky young hiker, valiantly making her way up and down a treacherous snowy peak amidst the chaos of an avalanche. Additionally, the movie's poster is seen in the movie theater in the film as well. Top Gun, and heating up the Cold War. Since then, the United States military and Hollywood have enjoyed a long-standing and mutually beneficial relationship with cooperations maintained on both sides. The U.S. government agrees to allow the entertainment industry to film aircraft, etc., with agreed-upon restrictions made for their depiction. In the midst of the Cold War, a confusing and abstract stalemate arms race that your average American neither understood nor perhaps cared to understand, the U.S. military was willing to welcome any opportunity to encourage recruitment through Hollywood entertainment. The result was the 1986 flyboy fantasy film, Top Gun. The movie came out the same year my father finished flight school. Not in the Navy like Maverick was, but in the decidedly less glamorous U.S. Army, telling the tale of a young, hot-tempered yet highly skilled Navy fighter jet pilot played by Tom Cruise. The film depicted military life as one filled with fraternity, volleyball games, heartbreak, and romance as part of one big, compelling adventure yet to be lived. 4 years after the release of the blockbuster juggernaut Top Gun, the United States entered into what we Americans call the First Gulf War, one that helped to reaffirm the U.S.'s need to remain stationed in many bases around the world, despite the fact that we had, in fact, been retreating forces steadily from those locations since the apex of the Cold War had since passed. Nearly 40 years later, in the summer of 2022, Top Gun Maverick was released, starring the familiar, comforting face of Tom Cruise, reprising the role of our favorite Maverick. It would appear he was helping to prepare the American public, as well as the rest of the world, for this newly branded reason to once again justify our continued involvement in the Middle East. My personal experience with military propaganda. I've mentioned in another podcast episode that I grew up from the ages of 8 through 17 on a U.S. military base in Germany. The years I spent there were from 1988 until 1997, during which time my family, like most American soldier families, did not have access to any television channels other than the Armed Forces Network, or AFN as we called it. From Wikipedia, AFN is a government television and radio broadcast service the U.S. military provides to those stationed or assigned overseas. Headquartered at Fort George G. Meade, Maryland, AFN's broadcast operations, which include global radio and television satellite feeds, emanate from the AFN Broadcast Center/Defense Media Center in Riverside, California. AFN was founded on the 26th of May, 1942, in London as the Armed Forces Radio Service, AFRS. So, before the internet and smartphones were popularly available, my family had this one channel to receive our entertainment and news. And at the time, we did not receive commercials. To fill the time in between the limited American TV shows we received way after they aired in the States, we viewed military propaganda and educational videos instead of commercials for American products for purchase. From Schoolhouse Rock cartoons to instructional videos on what to do if you are captured and held as a prisoner of war. I will give my name, rank, and serial number. You can imagine that the interstitial programming covered a wide variety of programming needs, needing to service the children of military families with playful educational videos like those in Schoolhouse Rock. The videos also showcased educational segments to inform both soldiers and their dependents about U.S. military historical events. On this day in American military history was a phrase my family would jokingly chant through our apartment like it was the Burger King jingle or some other popular commercial song. That's how ingrained that information was in our brains from 9 years of this stuff. One of my family's favorites was an AFN original that cautioned soldiers not to rock the vending machines. In it, a soldier who clearly hadn't seen this instructional video suffered greatly when the machine inevitably toppled onto him after a one-sided shoving match. While children in the United States were being taught how to be good little capitalists, I was busy learning how to be a good little soldier. But instead of enlisting and or attempting to get a scholarship to a military academy after I graduated high school, I took my father's advice not to. Because, as he said, I only did it so that you girls would never have to. Because of his advice, I felt empowered to attempt what seemed the impossible for someone of my background. I threw myself at the entertainment industrial complex with a journalism degree from the University of Georgia. For 20 years, I worked tirelessly. Actually, I was very tired. It was not tireless. From the inside, as a member of the invisible class of people who helped to keep the inner workings flowing seamlessly. Since I arrived in Los Angeles in 2002, signing my first apartment lease unceremoniously on the first anniversary of 9/11, I watched firsthand as the entertainment industry actively and in great quantities consistently produced and condoned Islamophobic content in these decades leading up to today. With consistently limited authentic representation of Muslim and Arab people on screen, Hollywood decided to fill in the cultural blanks in writers' rooms filled with writers who usually had zero connection or motivation to providing a contextually accurate portrayal of these characters they created. Characters who Americans truly believed were grounded in deep truth. Instead, we were given plenty of explanations for why we now fight in our television and movies these past decades since World War II, with the emergence of these dark-skinned villains who seem to emerge mysteriously in great quantities from the desert, bloodthirsty and designed for holy war and little else. A voice for the Palestinian people. So now that I've given you some more context about how I'm viewing the use of propaganda by a nation-state as something for which I've already received an extensive education as a child serving my country overseas, I would like to hand the microphone to the people whose voices need to be heard the most at this time. A statement of Gaza's demands made by people in Gaza. Since those who are dying at the moment are thousands of our people, our main and central demand is to stop this killing without exceptions and without any manipulation of words or attempts to distort the essence of the occupation. The political terminology used by supporters or different influential parties, whether it is phrased as ceasefire or halt of hostilities or stop the aggression on Gaza, in all these cases, these are political phrases that do not relate to the essence of the demand, but rather to the degree of responsibility attributed to the speaker for the fighting, either for us or for the occupation. The actual term that means effectively stopping the firing is ceasefire, which is a specific term in international law, clear in its provisions and associated measures. Terminologies like halt ethnic cleansing and halt genocide and halt crimes against civilians are extremely detrimental in terms of their real impact now. Many of these terms imply a reduction in the killing rate among Palestinians below the level of ethnic cleansing and genocide. They do not mean stopping the killing. They do not mean stopping the aggression. And they also mean an exception for those classified by Israel or the United States as exempt from these cessation terms, meaning go on as you do in every previous aggression and kill anyone you consider Hamas-affiliated or non-civilian. In reality, these phrases align with Israeli-American desires, and there is no single precedent or guarantee that Israel fought for one day without committing dozens of war crimes and crimes against civilians. Stopping crimes only happens partially when there is a complete cessation of fire. Important demands for the Gaza Strip. Number 1, an immediate ceasefire that allows the entry of aid, retrieval of bodies, and the rescue of those trapped under the rubble, with a commitment to meet the real demands of the people of Gaza. Number 2, immediate restoration of energy, water, and communication services that Israel has cut off from the Gaza Strip. Number 3, sending delegations of solidarity from the United States, including doctors, paramedics, emergency experts, and others. This needs to happen urgently, and their presence at the Rafah border crossing would exert pressure on the political parties to open the crossing in a sustainable, not temporary manner. Number 4, if possible, we would like to see a U.S. senator friendly to our people in the Gaza Strip, at the Rafah crossing, or on an official visit to Egypt and Jordan. This would change a lot of pressure. Number 5, opening exit routes for civilians is a proposed solution that is not feasible and is rejected. Palestinian refugees refuse to be displaced again, and there is no other place for them. Security within the Gaza Strip is required, and the goal is to return residents to their homes with the presence and assistance of the Red Cross, UNRWA representatives, and solidarity delegations. Regarding the ceasefire, our demands here, as residents or Americans, and the entire solidarity movement do not bind the factions or Palestinian forces in any way, but it is our duty to push with all our might towards the world's acceptance of the idea of a ceasefire. If a Palestinian wishes to continue their resistance, this will not deter them, but there is a war front that have been formed, and we must work to dismantle it with these types of decisions. And that is the end of the statement. So that is what the Palestinian people have to say. And it seems we should strive to listen to them while there are still some left to consult on the matter. And we should also ask ourselves, if the Palestinian people are gone, who will be next? Who will become so urgently inconvenient to this society in its current structure that they will also be forced expediently out of existence by the strong? And what can we do to stop it before it's too late? Guys, again, things are really heavy, but I appreciate everyone who listened and watched. If you're checking this out on my YouTube channel or on Spotify, where it's also in video. But thank you for hanging with me on this. It's an issue that I learn more about every day. And as for you, don't forget to make sure that you replenish those batteries, okay? Because life is long and sleep is short. I don't know. I think I just made that up. But have a lovely Friday and have a great weekend, okay? Take it easy.